In the early 20th century, scientists discovered how to split the atom. This discovery was a breakthrough in our understanding of physics. With the unprecedented violence and loss of life happening all over the world during World War II, it was only a matter of time before the leaders of our global superpowers tasked these brilliant scientists to turn this breakthrough into a weapon the likes of which mankind had never seen before. The sheer devastation caused by the atomic bombing struck fear into the hearts and minds of people all around the world, with many people, especially the scientists, believing that we had set the doomsday clock on mankind, that we had weapons capable of destroying the world, but we lacked the restraint and the maturity to not use them. Throughout the many decades since, the anxiety of the ever-present threat of the end of the world loomed over the collective conscience of people around the world. Since bringing about the end of the world was now possible, many creative minds speculated about what the end of the world would be like. This was essentially the birth of the dystopian sci-fi genre. Mankind on the fringes of extinction, struggling to survive and rebuild their way of life after a world-ending disaster. Japan, its civilians and population having been the victims of the atomic bomb, gave rise to a lot of writings and storytelling with a heavy anti-war and anti-nuclear sentiment. Even massive icons that make up the underpinnings of their pop culture to this day, such as Godzilla and Mobile Suit Gundam, were made with an explicitly anti-war, anti-nuclear message. But they would also have their own fair share of post-apocalyptic stories, in some cases based on some of the more Western works in the genre. Hokuto no Ken, localized as Fist of the North Star, is one of the most iconic and influential series to ever be published in Shonen Jump. It ran from 1983 to 88, and the manga has recently been receiving an English print hardback run, and the quality is excellent. The anime adaptation was done by Toei in 1984, but my favorite adaptation is the 1986 movie version. It has really fantastic animation and voice acting for its time period, and tells the story in a more tight, concise pace. Hokuto no Ken is what you get if you were to take a cartoonishly powerful Bruce Lee and put him into the setting of Mad Max. It's absurdly over the top, even by the standards of shonen series, and is intensely violent. Like, if you think modern anime is violent, nothing compares to the sheer levels of gore in the 80s and 90s ultra-violent schlock era, back when protagonists were huge, muscular men with massive wedge-shaped torsos and necks thicker than their heads. Surprisingly enough, though, this series isn't cynical or schlocky. It's surprisingly sincere and heartfelt, and has a lot of very powerful themes. Fist of the North Star has dozens of video game adaptations, including several RPGs on the Famicom, arcade games, beat-em-ups. There's even a hilariously unbalanced fighting game on the PS2 by Arc System Works, and it's incredible.
When Kenshiro. Final battle. Decide the destiny.
Most people will probably be familiar with Lost Paradise, released for the PS4, as it's basically an honorary Yakuza game set in the Fist of the North Star setting. Obviously, as part of the Musou Retrospective series, we're going to be taking a look at the Hokuto Musou, or Fist of the North Star Ken's Rage for the PS3. Applying the Musou formula to Fist of the North Star is a reasonably solid idea, considering that Kenshiro frequently wades through entire hordes of post-apocalyptic marauders and bandits without a scratch on him. It makes sense to have a game where you pave a road of partially exploded corpses in your wake with a martial arts beat-em-up flair. Ken's Rage is one of the Musou games that has more in common with a game like Streets of Rage or Golden Axe than it does with Dynasty Warriors. Far less often are there redundant hordes of enemies that you need to clear a path through in order to progress. Instead, it's pretty common in this game that you will need to kill every enemy in the relatively smaller encounters. In spite of the power fantasy of the ancient Hokuto Shinken martial arts, this game is not trivially easy. It can be difficult at times with very punishing bosses and uncommon regular enemies. The basic formula for most of the other Koei Omega Force games is here. Light attack combos, heavy attack finishers, there's a dodge roll for Ken, a grapple move which ends up being one of the most broken moves in the game, as a held enemy bashing into other hordes of enemies deals absurd damage, and ends up being a very reliable way to defeat tougher enemies later in the game as long as there are regular mob enemies around them. One of the signature visual trends in a lot of shonen manga and anime, in addition to various tokusatsu series, is this emphasis on special moves with fancy names where the characters flash over the screen as a non-diegetic element just for the audience. I've asked a bunch of people, including ones who are big tokusatsu fans, and nobody can tell me if this visual stylistic trope has a name. The Fist of the North Star manga is absolutely loaded with it, and so is this game. I don't actively dislike this element, but I do prefer how in the movie version it's not present, and the otherwise unbelievably over-the-top story is able to better maintain its immersion, I guess.
That's right. In fact, you're already dead.
In terms of the visuals for the game, the characters look really good, and have even more detail than they did in the manga or the anime, but the environments leave a lot to be desired. Every meme you can think of about the 7th gen consoles is on full display in this game. Overly gray, bland color palette, uncannily smooth and shiny textures. Oh, and the motion blur. Good God, the motion blur. Every single camera movement is nauseating. Legend Mode is this game's story campaign, and while you start out as Kenshiro following the events of the manga very closely, you do eventually unlock separate routes for Rei, Mamiya, and then later Toki and even Rao. However, this brings us to what will be a reoccurring problem for these Musou adaptations of licensed properties. Musou games live and die on the variety of characters available to play as. So even though this game does a great job at making almost every relevant Fist of the North Star character playable, for Legend Mode, the fact that Kenshiro's route is 14 missions long, while Mamiya's, for instance, is only 5, and Toki's a mere 3 by comparison, well, it can definitely cause burnout when you're forced to play as the same character for so long. Taking a break in between missions for Kenshiro to play a mission or two at a time for one of the other routes might be the best way to play this game casually. The way that stages are laid out I found to be an interesting compromise that fits the setting, but other Musou games won't exactly prepare you for the kinds of logic the level layout uses. You won't get any big open battles like in Dynasty Warriors. You get a lot of smaller, sometimes maze-like levels where you have to occasionally clear out debris from your way, climb up ladders, break through secret walls, and solve simple puzzles in order to progress. There are some occasional environmental hazards as well, such as explosive barrels and ordnance lying around, steel girders and spears you can pick up and use against your enemies, which you should always do given the opportunity, as they're very effective. There's even ponds of toxic waste you need to platform across in order to avoid damage, and the game's controls are definitely not designed for this. Even though the environments are lacking in color and variety, I suppose I appreciate the more labyrinthian layout to give you something to do that's interesting instead of just walking forward and punching things, and it makes sense with the setting, since if you're not out in the desert, you're in a collapsed post-apocalyptic city. Kenshiro's moveset is fine. The combat is decently satisfying, but it feels almost slightly too slow compared to what you would expect. Like, the range of his punches and kicks are just a little bit too short, and it doesn't feel like any other Musou game. Not that it really should. Most of his signature moves are there, including the iconic jump kick that will be used frequently to close the distance between you and an enemy. As per usual with these games, hitting the square button once and then triangle once will launch an enemy into the air, and you can keep them stunned and do air combos. The animation for hitting square twice and then triangle is a move you might find yourself spamming, as it's one of the only attacks in any degree of area of effect, and it's one of the only means of crowd controlling lots of small mob enemies. I have a huge problem with how bosses are handled in this game. It's pretty common for bosses in character action games, Musou games, and action RPGs to have multiple phases where the boss will gradually get more aggressive and begin using stronger attacks as you progress into the later phases. In this game, the boss's health bars are segmented to indicate these phase transitions, similar to the action RPG Tales of Arise that I finished earlier this year. The problem, though, is the sheer degree to which bosses change once you hit these later stages of the fight. Their attacks normally deal barely any damage, but all of a sudden in the second or later phases, they can take out massive chunks of your health right away. They also regenerate their own health up to the threshold of the current phase, forcing you to be more aggressive with your own attacks or risk losing progress. They just feel really unbalanced and not at all fun as a result. I've already gone on record to say that most Musou games end up having a hard time nailing boss fights in general, as they often just end up being you awkwardly trading blows and charging up your special attack gauge. But there will be some games later in the series that will handle bosses much better than this. As far as the other protagonists go, Rei might actually be even more fun to play as than Ken. His Nanto Shinken fighting style is faster and more elegant and is a nice change of pace. Rei feels like swinging a machete and Ken feels like swinging a sledgehammer. Rei is honestly just so damn cool. Like, remember when he handed a guy his own dismembered arms in the movie?
Hey, these belong to you?
Next we have Mamiya, who is completely absent from the movie, but is a prolific character in the manga. In spite of Rei being a bit of a misogynist dick to her and insisting that she can't fight, she's a remarkably competent fighter. Most Musou games have to have the one character with an unconventional ranged fighting style, and I tend to really enjoy these characters. And if I can just, be a little degenerate for a moment, she could beat the hell out of me, and I would thank her for it. Such an incredible character design. Toki is also super fun to play as. He's seemingly very overpowered and has some very elegant and graceful choreography. Again, I have to come back to the same discussion of character variety and how it helps and hurts this game. Moving from Kenshiro's route to the other characters' legend modes, it feels like each new character was even better and more fun than the last. I almost feel like the campaign would have been structured better if the switch to a different character was mandatory, because man, can playing 14 missions of Kenshiro's route cause burnout and leave you desperate to play the other routes instead. As far as the story goes, I do have to give a lot of credit to the production value in these cutscenes. Some of the other Musou adaptations we'll be covering don't have these well-choreographed in-engine cutscenes with dynamic camera angles. Arslan just uses, moving still frames from the anime, and Berserk uses clips from the movies until the story moves past the timeline of the films, and they're forced to make their own cutscenes, but it's just the characters standing there in shot-reverse shot dialogue. So compared to that, the cutscenes here are surprisingly well done. I originally wanted to do a moment-to-moment breakdown of every single chapter in the story and compare it to the manga and the movie, but I ended up walking back that decision because I thought it was making for an extremely long and boring video, and would force me to read the entire manga again just to be able to speak to it intelligently, and even then some fans would probably still not be satisfied. So just know that all of the important moments and a lot of the minor characters that Ken fights who were cut out of the film version are featured here as bosses or mini-bosses. So in conclusion, I definitely recommend this game, especially if you're a fan of Fist of the North Star, or want to see what a Musou game would be like if it was a beat-em-up instead of using swords or whatever. But I gotta come clean and be honest with you guys for a moment. I didn't really enjoy my time with this one. Part of that is more of a me problem than it is a problem with this game. Objectively, it isn't one of the better designed licensed Musou games. The motion blur and the lack of varied environments are a bit of a problem, but the gameplay could honestly use some improvement as well. The characters just feel ever so slightly too slow, and their reach just ever so slightly too short. Like, the power fantasy I wanted out of a game based on Fist of the North Star is just not quite fully realized. And unfortunately, I can't really offer a lot of constructive criticism on how to make it better, aside from tweaking the movement controls ever so slightly, and dialing back some of the ridiculous knockback you receive from enemies from time to time. But to get to my specific complaints, nowadays I'm just overwhelmed with a feeling of dread when I find out that a game is significantly longer than I thought it was after it's already too late. Ken's campaign is much, much too long. They did a great job selecting moments from the manga that would make for good video game levels and characters who would make for good boss fights, but a lot of the tedium lays in the stages being too overly long, padded, and repetitive. When the average stage takes around 45 minutes to complete, not including potentially dying multiple times to a boss, each play session of this game I was only really able to get through 2 or 3 stages at a time before I needed to take a break and put it down. I know this opinion is probably not going to be popular with a lot of other Musou fans out there, but this is why I prefer games like Fate Extella and Sengoku Basara. Musou games to me are really all about instant gratification. I want the stages to be shorter and more fluent, and I want the controls to be fast, chaotic, and responsive. I feel like objectively the best way to get the optimal experience out of Ken's Rage is to alternate a level of Ken's campaign with a level from the alternate characters' legend modes one at a time as you unlock them. That way you're controlling a variety of characters, which keeps the gameplay fresh, and you end up finishing all of the legend mode stories kind of around the same time of each other, which allows the game to be wrapped up in a nice little conclusive finale. But see, I wasn't able to do this because I wanted to talk about the legend modes in a linear story format, so I didn't want to have to hunt through 14 hours of footage looking for the one random Rei level when I'd already talked about the 3 other Kenshiro levels it's sandwiched between earlier in the script. It would have added weeks to the production of this video. So, once again, being a YouTuber impacts my ability to just relax and enjoy a game I would otherwise like just fine. If you're the kind of person who maybe only plays a few games a year or doesn't have a huge backlog like I do, then maybe the more content you can get out of a single game, the better, and Ken's Rage definitely delivers there. I probably also made the mistake of approaching this game from the perspective of a Musou fan first and a Fist of the North Star fan second. But if you're already a Fist of the North Star fan, you've probably already heard of or even played this game, and you don't need my convincing to try it if you haven't already. If I had the ability to, I would leisurely sit back and play this game at my own pace, and I probably would have enjoyed it a lot more. But don't worry, this won't be a reoccurring thing with other Musou games I'm planning on covering. Many of the games coming up I've already beaten casually many times before, hence why I've committed to making a video about them, so I already know how long they're going to take and that I enjoy them a lot more than this game. This series is definitely going to have its ups and downs with Musou games I passionately love and ones I'm more indifferent about, but Fist of the North Star Ken's Rage is perfectly middle of the road. It's a faithful adaptation of an IP I'm very passionate about, but the game itself is maybe only about a 6.5 out of 10 at best. Oh boy, this one really got away from me. I know I feel like I say that a lot, but I went through 3 different script revisions before I had a version of this video I was happy with, and even then I feel like it's not nearly as long or in-depth as I was planning, but it is what it is. Thank you guys so much for watching. Fist of the North Star is a really beautiful story, and I would love to do a full review of the movie one day, but YouTube copyright being what it is, I probably will not be able to show that much footage of the movie, but it's a really beautiful story about, what does it mean to have strength after there's no society and no rules anymore. It's like, strength is not supposed to be for dominating and subjugating people that are weaker than you. It's supposed to be for protecting and standing up for those who can't protect themselves. And I think that that's something that Kenshiro and a lot of the characters here really embody very well. I'm taking the month of May off to finish some other projects and attend MomoCon, and then in June I will be back with the Fall of Cybertron video, so thank you guys so much for watching. Oh, and if you're still watching, by the time this video goes up, Michelle and I will likely have cleared our first 1,000 subscribers, so we're probably going to do a little Q&A celebration video as a result of that, so we will be answering Q&As. Send us questions or send me questions as DMs on Twitter or Instagram. Do not send them as comments here on this video because I will not read them. Send me comments on the social medias I include in the credits, and I will answer those questions in the celebration video. So thank you guys so much once again, and we will see you next time. Most likely the next Musou video will be the Dragon Quest Heroes video, because it's a game I'm excited to play, so I want to breathe some more life into this series with a game I'm actually really passionate about. And with the news about Akira Toriyama, I just had Dragon Quest really, really on the brain lately, and I feel like there's no better time than now to finally talk about it, so look forward to that.